Few names spark as much curiosity as the Duggar family. Known for their deeply conservative values, strict upbringing, and highly publicized lives, every major life decision, especially marriage, draws attention. And now, a recent discussion on Jinger Duggar's podcast may have just shed new light on a question fans have been asking for years. Why did Jana Duggar wait until the age of 34 to get married? For longtime followers, Jana has always stood out. As the eldest daughter in the Duggar family, she grew up in a household where marriage and family life were not just encouraged, they were expected early. Her younger siblings began marrying in their late teens or early 20s, following a pattern that seemed almost like a family tradition. Yet Jana remained single for decades, quietly becoming one of the most talked about figures in the Duggar world. Ooh, so what changed? And more importantly, what was really going on behind the scenes? According to insights shared during Jinger Duggar's recent podcast episode, the answer may be far more complex than anyone initially thought. The podcast, which has increasingly become a space for reflection, honesty, and even subtle revelations, touched on themes of personal growth, pressure, and evolving beliefs. While Jana herself wasn't the one speaking directly, the discussion painted a picture that many fans believe finally explains her long wait. One of the biggest takeaways? Expectations. Growing up in a highly structured environment, Jana carried a unique role within the family. As the oldest daughter, she wasn't just another sibling. She was often seen as a caretaker, a second mother figure to her younger brothers and sisters. This responsibility may have shaped not only her daily life, but also her priorities. While others were preparing for courtship and marriage, Jana was deeply embedded in the functioning of the household. From managing responsibilities to helping raise younger children, her role may have made it difficult to step away and focus on her own personal future. And that's where things start to get interesting. During the podcast, Jinger hinted at the idea that not everyone in the family experienced the same level of pressure in the same way. While marriage was a shared expectation, how each individual navigated that expectation could vary significantly. For Jana, it may not have been about rejecting marriage, but about timing, readiness, and perhaps even quiet resistance. There's also the question of standards. Over the years, rumors have circulated that Jana had very specific expectations when it came to choosing a partner. Unlike some of her siblings who entered courtships relatively quickly, Jana seemed more selective. Whether that was a personal choice or influenced by her upbringing is still up for debate. But the podcast suggests it may have been a combination of both. And then there's the emotional layer. Jinger's discussion touched on something deeper, something less visible but incredibly powerful: the process of unlearning and redefining beliefs. As some members of the Duggar family have begun to step back and reevaluate the teachings they grew up with, it raises an important question. Was Jana doing the same, just in a quieter, more private way? It's possible that while the world was speculating about her relationship status, Jana was going through her own internal journey, one that required time, patience, and space. Because sometimes, waiting isn't about missing opportunities. Sometimes, it's about finding clarity. And if the podcast is any indication, Jana's story may not be one of delay, but of intention. As more details continue to surface, one thing is becoming clear. The narrative surrounding Jana Duggar is changing. What was once seen as unusual is now being re-examined through a different lens. One that considers personal growth, responsibility, and the courage to move at your own pace. As the conversation on Jinger Duggar's podcast continued, a deeper and more revealing layer began to unfold. One that shifted the focus from external expectations to internal transformation. Because according to what was discussed, Jana's story may not just be about responsibility or timing. It may also be about change. Over the past few years, fans have noticed a subtle but undeniable shift within parts of the Duggar family. Some members, including Jinger, have openly spoken about reassessing the beliefs they were raised with, questioning long-held ideas about relationships, independence, and personal identity. And while Jana Duggar has remained far more private, the podcast hinted that she may have been going through a similar process, just away from the public eye. This matters more than it might seem. Because in a family where courtship often followed a very specific structure, guided by strict rules, parental involvement, and clear expectations, stepping outside of that framework, even slightly, could take time. Time to think. Time to reflect. And most importantly, time to choose differently. Jinger spoke about how perspectives can evolve when someone begins to experience the world in a new way. Exposure to different ideas, different lifestyles, and different interpretations of faith can slowly reshape how a person views major life decisions, especially something as significant as marriage. And if Jana was navigating that kind of shift internally, it could explain why she didn't follow the same path as her siblings. Instead of rushing into a relationship that fit the family mold, she may have been waiting until she truly understood what she wanted, on her own terms. That idea alone challenges years of assumptions. For a long time, the public narrative painted Jana as someone who was simply waiting or unable to find the right match. But what if that narrative was never accurate to begin with? What if she wasn't waiting at all? What if she was choosing? The podcast subtly pushed this perspective, suggesting that independence, especially for someone in Jana's position, might not always look loud or rebellious. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's patient. And sometimes it's simply the act of not following a path that doesn't feel right. There's also another factor that cannot be ignored: visibility. Unlike some of her sisters who shared their courtships openly with cameras and audiences, Jana maintained a level of privacy that left room for speculation. Without clear updates, every year that passed only fueled more questions. But according to the tone of Jinger's discussion, that privacy may have been intentional. Because going through personal change, especially within a highly scrutinized environment, is not something everyone wants to do publicly. And that brings us to one of the most important ideas hinted at in the podcast. Not every story is meant to unfold on a timeline set by others. For Jana, stepping outside of expectations, whether it was delaying marriage, redefining her standards, or simply taking time for herself, may have been one of the most significant decisions of her life. And yet, from the outside, it looked like nothing was happening, which is exactly why so many people misunderstood her journey. But then comes the turning point. Because if Jana was indeed waiting for clarity, for independence, or for a different kind of relationship, what finally changed at 34? What made that moment the right moment? Jinger's podcast didn't give a direct answer, but it strongly hinted that when Jana did decide, it wasn't because of pressure. So what does it really mean that Jana Duggar chose to marry at 34? According to the deeper message behind Jinger Duggar's podcast, it may come down to something far more powerful than timing, LDGT, or even family expectations. It comes down to ownership. Because for perhaps the first time in her life, Jana's decision appears to be fully her own. Not shaped by tradition. Not rushed by expectation. Not influenced by comparison. But chosen, intentionally. And that changes everything. Throughout the years, the Duggar family has often been associated with a very specific formula: grow up, enter courtship early, marry young, and start a family. It was a pattern that repeated itself again and again, becoming almost predictable to outside observers. But Jana broke that pattern. Quietly. Without announcement. Without explanation. And now, looking back through the lens of what was discussed on the podcast, that silence speaks louder than ever. Because sometimes the biggest decisions aren't the ones you explain to the world. They're the ones you make for yourself. Jinger's reflections suggested that growth doesn't always happen in visible ways. It's not always a public transformation. It's not always a dramatic shift. Sometimes it's a slow, internal process. A gradual redefining of identity. A careful rebuilding of beliefs. And a deliberate choice to move forward only when everything feels aligned. If Jana was on that kind of journey, then her story isn't about waiting too long. It's about refusing to move too soon. And that distinction is crucial. Because in a culture, both inside and outside of reality TV, that often celebrates speed and early milestones, choosing to wait can be misunderstood as falling behind. But what the podcast subtly reveals is the opposite. Jana may not have been behind at all. She may have been ahead in a completely different way. Taking time to understand herself. Taking time to define what she truly wanted in a partner. Taking time to step into a decision that she could fully stand behind. And when that moment finally came at 34, it wasn't delayed. It was deliberate. That idea reshapes the entire narrative. It challenges the assumption that there's a right age for marriage. It questions the pressure to follow a fixed timeline. And it highlights something that resonates far beyond just one family: the importance of making life decisions on your own terms. Because at the end of the day, Jana Duggar's story may not just be about her. It may be a reflection of something universal: the courage to wait, the strength to choose differently, and the quiet confidence to trust your own timing, even when the world doesn't understand it. And maybe that's the real takeaway from Jinger Duggar's podcast. In a developing story that is drawing widespread attention and raising serious concerns, the extended family of Joseph Duggar is now reportedly facing a housing crisis, one that comes amid troubling abuse-related allegations that have begun to surface publicly. The situation is complex, emotional, and still unfolding. But what is already clear is that this is not just a private family matter anymore. It has quickly become a topic of public scrutiny, especially given the Duggar family's long-standing presence in the spotlight. For those who may not be familiar, Joseph Duggar is one of the many children from the well-known Duggar family, a household that rose to fame through reality television and has remained a subject of public discussion for years. While Joseph himself has largely maintained a lower profile compared to some of his siblings, his connection to the broader family means that any controversy involving relatives tends to draw immediate attention. And this time, the focus has shifted toward his in-laws. According to emerging reports and online discussions, members of Joseph Duggar's extended family, through marriage, are currently dealing with a significant housing instability issue. Sources suggest that this crisis did not arise in isolation, but rather in connection with serious allegations involving abuse within that family circle. While details are still limited and continue to evolve, the situation appears to involve both legal and personal complications that have impacted living arrangements, safety concerns, and overall stability. This is where the story becomes particularly sensitive. Any allegation involving abuse carries weight and responsibility. It is important to approach such topics carefully, recognizing that information can change, investigations take time, and not all claims are immediately verified. However, what makes this situation especially notable is the intersection of two issues happening at once: allegations of abuse and the immediate consequence of a housing crisis. Because when a family faces accusations of this nature, it can trigger a chain reaction. Living situations may suddenly become unsafe or untenable. Individuals may be forced to relocate quickly. Support systems can become strained or even collapse entirely. And in some cases, those affected, especially vulnerable individuals, may find themselves without stable housing at all. That appears to be what is being reported here. The housing crisis, according to early information, may not simply be about financial hardship or eviction in traditional sense. Instead, it could be tied to the need for separation, legal intervention, or protective measures stemming from the abuse-related claims. If true, that adds an entirely different layer to the story. Because this would mean that the loss of housing is not just a logistical issue. It's a consequence of a deeper, more serious situation. And naturally, this raises questions. What exactly led to these allegations? Who is involved? And how is this impacting not just Joseph Duggar's in-laws, but also the broader family network connected to them? At this stage, many of those questions remain unanswered. What we do know, however, is that situations like this often unfold gradually in the public eye. Initial reports surface, followed by more details, statements, and sometimes official actions as investigations progress. And given the Duggar family's history with public controversies, attention on this story is likely to grow. But beyond the headlines, there is a human element that cannot be ignored. Families in crisis, especially those dealing with allegations of abuse, often face immense emotional, psychological, and logistical challenges all at once. The disruption of housing is just one visible piece of a much larger and more complicated reality. And as more information continues to emerge, the focus will likely shift toward accountability, safety, and what happens next for those directly affected. As more attention turns toward the situation involving the in-laws of Joseph Duggar, a clearer but more complicated picture is beginning to take shape. Because this isn't just about a housing issue. It's about what led to it. And according to ongoing discussions and early reports, the housing crisis may be directly tied to serious abuse-related allegations that have disrupted the family's internal structure. Now, it's important to be precise here. At this stage, much of the information remains unconfirmed, and no final legal conclusions have been publicly established. Allegations are not the same as proven facts, but even the presence of such claims can have immediate and far-reaching consequences, especially within tightly connected family systems. And that's exactly what seems to be happening. When allegations of abuse surface within a household, one of the first impacts is often separation. Individuals may leave voluntarily, or authorities and family members may intervene to create distance for safety reasons. That separation alone can trigger instability. Homes that once housed multiple family members may suddenly be divided. Temporary arrangements may need to be made quickly. And in some cases, people, especially those with fewer resources, may find themselves without a stable place to stay. This appears to be a key factor in the situation connected to Joseph Duggar's in-laws. The housing crisis being discussed may not stem from financial collapse in the traditional sense, but rather from sudden displacement, caused by the need to respond to a serious and sensitive situation. And that brings us to another important layer: support systems. In moments like these, families typically rely on extended relatives, community networks, or organizations for help. But when the situation itself involves internal conflict or allegations, those support systems can become complicated. People may take sides. Some may step in to help. Others may distance themselves entirely. And in highly public families like the Duggars, there's an added factor: visibility. Even if Joseph Duggar himself is not directly involved in the allegations, his connection to the situation places a spotlight on everything happening around it. Public attention can intensify pressure, making it harder for those involved to navigate the crisis privately. And that pressure can affect decisions. Where people go, who they trust, how quickly they act. Jinger Duggar, in past discussions unrelated to this specific situation, has spoken about how growing up in a highly visible environment can make personal challenges feel even more overwhelming. While she hasn't addressed this case directly, her insights help frame how complex situations can become when they unfold under public scrutiny. For Joseph Duggar and his extended family, this may be one of those moments. A situation that would already be difficult under normal circumstances is now layered with the tension, speculation, and ongoing questions. And those questions are growing. What role, if any, are other family members playing in providing support? Are there safe and stable arrangements being put in place? And perhaps most importantly, how are those directly affected by the allegations being protected during this time? Because while headlines often focus on the broader narrative, the reality is much more personal. At the center of the story are individuals navigating uncertainty, possibly dealing with fear, possibly dealing with loss of stability, and trying to make sense of a situation that may have changed their lives very quickly. The housing crisis, in that sense, is not just a headline. It's a symptom, a visible sign of something deeper unfolding behind the scenes. And as more details continue to emerge, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. As this situation continues to unfold, the focus is now shifting from what happened to what comes next. Because for the in-laws of Joseph Duggar, the housing crisis is only one part of a much larger and more serious reality, one that may involve long-term consequences, both legally and personally. At the center of it all are unresolved questions surrounding the abuse-related allegations. If these claims move forward into formal investigations or legal proceedings, the impact could extend far beyond the immediate family. Legal involvement often brings structured processes, interviews, evidence review, and potential court actions that can take months or even years to resolve. For those affected by the housing crisis, these are not distant concerns. They are immediate, daily realities. Because displacement, especially when it happens suddenly, can create a ripple effect. Employment may be disrupted. Children, if involved, may face interruptions in their routines or education. Emotional stress can increase, particularly when uncertainty remains high. And in situations tied to serious allegations, that stress can be even more intense. There is also the question of accountability. If investigations confirm wrongdoing, there could be legal consequences for those involved. But even before any official outcome, the social and personal consequences can already be significant. Relationships may fracture, trust may be broken, and entire family dynamics can shift in ways that are difficult to repair. For a family connected to the public identity of the Duggar name, those changes are likely to be even more visible. But beyond the public lens, this remains a deeply human situation. Because behind every headline are people navigating real challenges, uncertainty, instability, and the need to make difficult decisions under pressure. And perhaps the most important aspect moving forward is safety. Ensuring that anyone potentially affected by the allegations is protected. Ensuring that living environments are stable and secure. And ensuring that the response to the situation prioritizes well-being above all else. These are the factors that will ultimately define how this story develops, not just in terms of news coverage, but in terms of real-life outcomes. At the same time, it's important to recognize the limits of what is currently known. As with any developing situation, early reports can be incomplete. Details may change. New information